Hi guys, this is Creative Cuts, a channel where I build, paint and create things. In today's video I'm going to build some craters. These are great for games of 40k but could also be easily used in a more historical tabletop game. Sure, you can buy pre-made plastic ones, but where's the fun in that? So to begin, I grabbed some thin plywood offcuts that I had spare and began drawing out some circles with a compass. I then started roughly drawing out the overall shape of my craters. I tried to keep these shapes as irregular and asymmetrical as possible. Once completed, they kind of looked like giant fried eggs. I cut these out with a jigsaw and then sanded the edges a little. This not only makes them nicer to the touch, but I also took this opportunity to bevel the edges so you don't have such a pronounced edge. You can do this by hand using sandpaper, but if you have one, a rotary tool such as a Dremel will save a ton of time and energy. Next, I mixed up some sculptor mold, a great modelling product made from plaster and mashed up paper, which gives you a wonderful texture with very little effort. You could achieve a similar effect by using household filler or spackle and adding some dirt and small stones, but I've got loads, so I'll use it. I mix this up quite dry so the texture is even more pronounced, but the downside of this is that with less water in the mix it will dry much faster. Therefore, to counteract this, I only mix up small amounts at a time. Using my fingers, I roughly follow the lines of the circles and begin to create the basic structure of the craters. I take care to leave some parts higher than others, creating more variation and giving it an overall more natural feel. You can use some water to smooth the sculptor mold as it is drying, but I decided against this as I like the rough texture. I let this dry overnight, and when I came back the following morning everything had hardened up really nicely. However, due to the plaster in this product, it is very porous and would just absorb any liquids like paint or washes. So I sealed everything with some Mod Podge. This not only gives a great barrier between the plaster and subsequent paint, but also helps harden things even further. While this was still wet, I used this opportunity to kill two birds with one stone and sprinkled some dry dirt on top to begin to create some ground texture. I tried to give everything a quick prime with some grey spray paint, but I ran out midway through, so I decided to do things properly and use my airbrush to spray everything with some Pro Acryl black primer. This gets some dark colour into all the nooks and crannies and adds depth to what will be the shadow areas. Over the top of the black, I load up some mid-grey and begin to spray with a downward angle similar to what is often referred to as a zenithal highlight. This means the paint hits the surface from above, leaving any recessed areas with a darker colour underneath. Next, I mix up a lighter grey with some brown and lightly dust this over the model. This creates even more definition, and with the addition of the brown it adds a bit of life to everything. I then grab some coffee sticks and break these up into small, unequal pieces. I use lots of coffee sticks in my builds and to mix paint with, so rather than go on little stealth missions to restock my supplies from the local petrol station, I ordered a bag of 1,000 online for cheap. Then with some basing glue I made some little rubble piles. I sprinkled some dirt and small stones, my broken coffee sticks, a bit more glue, and topped this off with a mixture of sawdust and tile grout. Now you could just leave your craters like this and you'd be good to go, but I wanted to create a little history, a passage of time if you will, as if these craters had happened a long time ago and have since been repurposed as defensive positions. So I cut some holes for little fence posts and began to build in little traces of human life. I used some balsa wood for the posts and some coffee sticks for the planking. I then used some corrugated card as scrap metal and added this to my rubble piles and also used it to extend the broken fence. And again tying everything together with a light sprinkle of sawdust. It's this layering of materials that creates more visual information and detail with very little effort. I had some mini barbed wire from a previous project and added this randomly to the craters. Also left over from a previous project, I had some card I-beams where I'd saved the offcuts. Link above if you'd want to watch that one in a bit more detail. I also had some fine metal mesh, again where I'd saved the offcuts. You can kind of see a theme developing here. I kept adding little bits here and there and small pieces of plastic, more barbed wire, and as before tying everything together with some sawdust. I built in little ramps with yet more coffee sticks, and to those of you familiar with this channel will know that I like to work instinctively, making things up as I go. No real plans here. Again, left over from a previous project, I had a stock of barrels and little boxes. I managed to snag a big bag of these from Etsy, a great alternative if you don't own a 3D printer. I stuck a few of these around my craters. Again, using instantly recognisable objects like barbed wire or barrels can immediately add a little sense of story. This place has a past, and while it would seem insane to still be using fossil fuels in the far-flung future, I will employ a good dose of artistic license here and play fast and loose with timescales in my imaginary scenarios. Next, I mixed up some milliput. For those new to this hobby, milliput is a great modelling putty that you can use to easily sculpt small objects with. I thought some sandbags would be another instantly recognisable visual shorthand that would immediately communicate a human presence. I rolled out some sausages and then squashed these flat a little. I then cut these into little rectangles. Don't worry if they're not all the same size, once placed you really wouldn't be able to notice. And then I placed my little sandbags onto my craters. To create some texture on the sandbags, you can use a piece of fabric to press an imprint onto the putty to give the illusion of a canvas sandbag. I didn't have any fabric to hand, so I just used another little piece of mesh as a sort of substitute. I also carved in some seams with a sharp blade. All these little added details really help sell the illusion of a sandbag, in my opinion. Once the putty had cured, I then primed everything with some black from the airbrush. This allows me much more control than a spray can, and a little bit of overspray helps ground all my objects and gives free shadows. You could do this with a brush too. Now, just because I have an airbrush and use it regularly doesn't mean that all of you have one. But I want to use this as an example to illustrate some of the best advice I can give to anyone new to the hobby. And that is to teach yourself to think around a problem. Think outside the box. Think of alternatives. Not everything has to cost loads of money. Be creative. I love hearing all your tips in the comments, and it really goes to show how there are often many ways to solve a particular problem. I base coated all my various objects, trying to use colours that would look realistic and yet also work well together. In some places the black overspray was a little bit too much, so I lightly dry brushed over the offending areas. And again, those familiar with the channel will know how much I love my little bottle of rust from Dirty Down. I have found that it works best if you heat the area a little first, as it seems to kickstart the reaction. An old hairdryer was perfect for this. Working slowly, I dabbed on the liquid to metal areas and let this slowly build up. For areas of heavy corrosion, I accentuated some areas with some bright orange paint. For the leaky oil drums, I used some glossy black paint. The gloss of the oil against the ultra matte finish of the rust. It's a really nice contrast in my opinion. And lastly, I drilled in some bullet holes with a pin vise. I want to thank you all for taking the time to watch this video. And even though I've taken a pretty basic piece of terrain, in this case some craters, hopefully I've shown that with a little care and attention you can make these look great too. And they don't need to cost the earth. Sure, I have access to lots of materials because I do this regularly, but most of this build was made up of offcuts and little scraps that I'd saved. If you've enjoyed this video, you can show your appreciation by hitting the like button. You can subscribe to stay up to date with all the latest videos, and possibly share it with a friend who might find it interesting. Thank you all for the amazing support, and I'll see you in the next one. Enjoy.